It's been said that none of us can do anything amazing on our own. That the vast majority of what humans have done that's truly incredible, they have done with other people. One other person, two other people, 1,000 other people. Now, I think there is a lot of truth and wisdom in the idea that we can do incredible things together. And maybe a lot of those incredible things, using some kind of measurement, maybe they will outweigh, ultimately, what people have done as individuals. I get its point. Maybe you do. I'm not going to argue its point. In fact, I'm not a big fan of arguing much of anything. Years ago I was really interested in the study of philosophy and psychology, and you come across a lot of different kinds of energies or spirits or attitudes or approaches, and one of them is the argument approach. As if the notion that because you can find 6 supporting reasons for your view and I can only find 5, somehow yours is more true or more valid. As the years have gone by, I find less and less interest in that, particularly the spirit of argumentation. You know, if you start holed up in a point, if you start with you're already dug in somewhere, I just think it's going to make it that much harder for you or I to enrich our perspective by sharing something that doesn't jive with that initial perspective. You know, I think it's really important to be interested in not just looking support for your already established ideas, but I think there's enormous value in, while enjoying or embodying a set of values today, at the same time, I think there's a lot to be said for walking around with some open windows, reevaluating some stuff, and maybe even trying on something brand new. I mean, imagine if you didn't do that. You'd maybe have the same views and same values you had when you were 6 or 10 or 25. So having said all that as a bit of a background, or to, lay down a canvas, let me try to paint something a bit more particular on it. And that is, I want to do a bit of a dive into the idea that, and you've said it yourself, or you certainly heard it, let's agree to disagree. It bugs me. It triggers me. And I've been looking at why. Why does that bug me so much? I'm a mammal, and I'm a mammal that's bugged. Something about it doesn't, something smells for me about that. And yes, on one hand, and I've always got a few hands going here, on one hand, sure, I can imagine lots of situations that are so fraught with tension, that are so potentially explosive, that are so complicated, that it is quite a feat, and that everybody involved has reason to sort of pat each other on the back that they've arrived at a kind of truce. Let's agree to disagree, which inherently means that let's both agree or find the resources inside ourselves individually to be comfortable with granting the other person room to hold a different view. Now notice the difference between a differing view and a contrasting or conflicting view, a total opposite view. Total opposite views are really, I think, rarer than people often make out. Complete opposites. Usually two people are a bit more, even on the same page, than they might feel in a moment. And this is another situation where our feelings can be so extreme. They go to black, thick, white, good, bad, yes, no. And in my experience in the world is really not made up of those extremes. I don't see a lot of that. To me, it's less black and white, more grays. Now, the bad news on that is I really do believe that what drives people crazy is less the blacks and whites in the world. I think people can be quite adept at accepting and adapting to blacks and whites. But the grays are hard. I think the grays are what offer real potential and opportunity. And I think almost that's where hope resides, in seeing things in different hues rather than in blacks and whites. But they can also drive us nuts, the subtleties of it. And, to be so close to something but not quite there can be hard, for sure, for human beings. And I've definitely had more than a few moments in that, that upset, that confusion. However, getting back to this notion of let's agree to disagree, people act like it's something, let's put a check in that box, as if it's an achievement. And apart from the very extreme situations that human beings find themselves in, that truly the very, very best they can possibly do in that moment is to agree to disagree. That is, in the name of peace. That's the best box they can find to both put their check marks in. Apart from those extreme situations, I think much of the time, in my mind, it is nothing to be proud of. Agreeing to disagree. I've heard people say it. I've said it myself. And my sense, time and again, is there is more a tone of defeat or resignation, which I'm not a big fan of either. I think we can do better. I look to myself in moments of conflict and moments of differing views to do better than let's agree to disagree. Note the contrast, and I've talked on this idea before, but when people say, well, I'm a tolerant person, as if that expresses a real reflection of strength and humility. And I don't think it does. I think much of the time, saying that you're tolerant actually can belie an arrogance, a judgmental and assuming kind of nature. And I don't think a lot of good comes from that kind of stuff. In the same way, let's agree to disagree, to me, often comes across as frosty, as just this side of throwing our hands up in dismay and even disgust. So for me, personally, when that's in the air, I've even had someone sort of say to me, hey, why don't we just agree to disagree? It's hard for me not to say, well, yes, I'm open to that for sure. What I'd rather, personally, though, is that we agree to consider the other person's view. Let's agree to celebrate the difference. Let's agree to, even though we see it differently, let's agree to have our views, but also encourage the other person to have their view, to share their view. Let's agree that the other person's view is valid. Let's agree to own the fact that if I can't see or agree with where you're coming from, it's in part a reflection of my limits, my inability to see. Too often, we don't keep in mind the other person, their view, has a history, has a validity, has an intelligence, has an insight. Now, unless you want to walk around with this notion that you're a lot smarter than most of the other people you're talking with, if you want to do that, I wish you well with that. Both, I'm saying it both sarcastically and also with true sympathy. Okay, I wish you well with that, because that is a form, that'll kill you in so many ways. First thing it does is it separates you and isolates you from everyone around you, thinking you're smarter. Okay? Second thing is you show somebody who's separated. You show me somebody whose views have left them in a place of separation, isolation. And, that's where you start drinking your own Kool-Aid. That's when your incestuous views, they are so homogeneous, rather heterogeneous, that they're gonna start being really narrow and self-destructive and myopic and all that kind of crazy stuff. So as long as you're like me and you're hoping not to just try to somehow short-term band-aid solution protect your fragile ego and your insecurities with the illusion of superiority, if you're not going to buy into that, then let's not buy into that. And instead, when the next time you have conflict with somebody, next one, when you're both trying your best, and that's another big piece. So often we start to assume the other person is somehow this is human beings, at least as I know them, we start to think they're almost deliberately not seeing the smarts of what we're saying, or they're resisting, or it's somehow on them. Rather than saying to yourself, the fact that you're not agreeing to my view might partly be because I'm not expressing it very well. Or might be because you've got a whole other take on things that, like I was saying before, is as valid and insightful and has a history and has benefits and upsides and blah, blah, as much as mine. When you really drop down into, when it becomes real for you, a more neutral playing field, a real balanced view of, when you really drop to a more humble situation and perspective and feeling around that this conflict we're having in this moment, it is nobody's fault. It is nobody's fault. When it's no one's fault, when you can let go, and this is stuff that lives on more subconscious, levels for a lot of us. It's not something we can usually get at just consciously. A whole bunch of the ideas I share with these recordings I make, I know might strike some people as, quote unquote stupid, or will strike somebody else as, that makes a lot of sense, that's great. But that's not the same as really taking it inside and internalizing and making it your own and feeling your way through it. That requires work, but it's also about, and I've accepted this years ago as a communicator, so much when you're sharing an idea with other people is also about timing. The timing in the other person's life. The notion that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Sounds like it almost, you could say that at any time to someone who doesn't agree with you. And it sets you up as a teacher and them as an unready student, right? A little passive aggressive there, just a little. And that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about acceptance. Accepting that everyone, of course, at a different time and place, and that, you've probably had the experience like I have where you've heard something before at a certain point in your life and it sort of landed on, not deaf ears, but you heard, and then you hear it again and boom, it's the right timing for you. So when I share these ideas, I'm always keeping that in mind, right? So I hope this video today, or this audio recording today, I hope you found it engaging, and I hope that the next time you're tempted to say, or you hear someone say to you, let's agree to disagree. I'm not saying you should jump out and take exception with their use of the thing, but just, my goal is to try to be more mindful, to hear things and see things and say things with ultimately greater insight or greater awareness. Not ultimate awareness, of course, but a slightly increased awareness around something. And so I hope this recording has sparked some ideas in yourself, and that the next time you do hear that phrase, maybe a few of these ideas will bubble up to the surface and help you respond or process in a way that ultimately I think is more beneficial, more positive, more empowered. Good luck.